The badge reader flashed red 3 times before the message finally appeared. Access denied, credentials revoked. I stood frozen in the executive corridor of Obsidian Infrastructure's headquarters, laptop bag still hanging off my shoulder, as the reality of the moment began to land. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been in the server room finishing the final authentication protocols for the largest deal in the company's history. Now I couldn't even get into the boardroom where that same deal was supposed to close. "There's been a mistake," I said to the man blocking the doorway, though I already knew there hadn't been. His expression confirmed it. "No mistake," Blake Hutchinson replied, his voice carrying that particular brand of confidence reserved for people who've never faced real consequences. "Your hardware profile is ancient history. The architecture team doesn't need legacy specialists anymore. We're moving in a different direction." He took a step forward, forcing me to retreat. "So clear out. We have actual decision makers arriving any minute." Blake was 32, maybe 33, 3 years younger than me. He joined Obsidian Infrastructure 6 months earlier, right after his father, Graham Hutchinson, acquired a controlling stake in the company. His title was Chief Innovation Officer, though everyone understood what that actually meant. He was being groomed to eventually take over, learning the business from the top down, which might have been reasonable if he'd shown the slightest intention of actually learning anything. Through the glass walls behind him, I could see the presentation I'd spent 6 weeks building. My slides, my infrastructure diagrams, my security protocols, the entire cloud migration strategy meant to move Stratosphere Data Alliance's operations onto our platform. A $4.2 billion contract that would triple Obsidian Infrastructure's valuation overnight. "Blake, I'm the lead architect on this project." I kept my voice steady. "Randall Monroe from Stratosphere is expecting me to walk him through the technical specifications, the authentication frameworks, the redundancy protocols." "Were you not listening?" Blake cut me off. "I said we're going in a different direction. My team has updated everything. Your approach was too conservative, too focused on old-school security models. Monroe wants innovation, not paranoia." The elevator chimed behind me. Blake's eyes darted past my shoulder, and his entire posture shifted. Shoulders back, chin lifted, salesman's smile switched on. "Mr. Monroe," he boomed with manufactured warmth, "welcome to Obsidian Infrastructure. I'm Blake Hutchinson, Chief Innovation Officer. We're thrilled to finalize this partnership." I turned around. Randall Monroe stepped off the elevator flanked by 2 executives I recognized from video calls. His Chief Technology Officer, Amanda Sheffield, and Chief Security Officer, Kyle Brennan. Monroe was in his late 50s, silver-haired, carrying the unmistakable presence of someone who'd built a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing. His eyes swept the corridor and landed on me with recognition. "Ms. Delacroix," he nodded, then turned to Blake with a puzzled look. "Is there a problem? We're ready to begin the technical review." Blake didn't hesitate. "Actually, Mr. Monroe, we've made some exciting improvements to the proposal. I'll be personally walking you through our enhanced infrastructure design." Alina was just leaving. "She's transitioning to other projects." That was my name. Alina Delacroix, Senior Cloud Architect at Obsidian Infrastructure, or at least I had been an hour earlier. Welcome back to Payback Office, where we tell stories of professional justice and the exact moment corporate bullies realize they've made a career-ending mistake. What unfolded in that corridor turned into the most expensive 10-minute conversation in Obsidian Infrastructure's history, and if you want to see just how spectacularly Blake Hutchinson's arrogance came crashing down, stay for the whole story. Before we dig into how this all fell apart, if workplace karma and stories about standing up to corporate nepotism are your thing, consider subscribing. We're building toward 6,000 subscribers, a community of people who believe competence should outweigh connections. No pressure though. Glad you're here either way. So Alina Delacroix, that's me. 35 years old. Born and raised in Minneapolis by parents who taught me that respect has nothing to do with status, and everything to do with recognizing the humanity in the people around you. My father managed a logistics warehouse. My mother worked as a school nurse. Neither had a college degree, but both understood something Blake Hutchinson never would. The people actually doing the work deserve to be heard. That upbringing shaped how I led teams, how I treated junior developers, how I never lost sight of the fact that the night shift system administrators keeping servers running at 3 in the morning mattered just as much as anyone in the C-suite. I joined Obsidian Infrastructure 8 years ago, back when it was a scrappy operation of 40 employees with big ambitions. I was employee number 37. I built our cloud infrastructure from scratch, designed our security architecture, and mentored a dozen engineers who went on to leadership roles of their own. When Graham Hutchinson bought the company 6 months earlier, I'd been cautiously hopeful. New capital usually meant growth, better resources, bigger opportunities. Then Blake arrived, and within weeks the culture started to rot. But this moment in the corridor was different. This wasn't garden variety ego or office politics. This was Blake actively sabotaging the most important deal in the company's history, because he couldn't stand not being the smartest person in the room. Monroe's expression hardened into something harder to read. I appreciate innovation, Mr. Hutchinson, but we've spent 6 weeks reviewing Ms. Delacroix's architecture. Our security team has vetted every protocol. Our compliance officers have signed off on her framework. Unless there's been a fundamental change I'm not aware of. Improvements, not changes, Blake said smoothly. Alina did solid foundational work, but we've optimized the approach. More efficient, more scalable, more aligned with cutting-edge cloud paradigms. I caught Amanda Sheffield's eye. The Stratosphere CTO looked uneasy. Over the past month and a half of technical deep dives, we'd built a genuine working rapport. She knew this architecture inside and out, and she also knew that last-minute changes to enterprise cloud infrastructure were a red flag, not a selling point. What kind of optimizations? Sheffield asked. Blake motioned toward the boardroom. Why don't we sit down? I'll walk everyone through the enhanced design. Alina, you're dismissed. That was the moment I made my decision. I could have walked away, probably should have. Gone to HR, called an attorney, filed complaints through the proper channels. But something in Randall Monroe's expression told me he needed to understand exactly what was happening. And more than that, I needed to know whether Blake had actually touched my infrastructure. Mr. Monroe? I addressed the Stratosphere CEO directly, ignoring Blake entirely. Before we begin, I need to ask, do you have Master Cloud clearance credentials with you? The access codes your team sent over yesterday. Monroe's eyebrows lifted slightly. Yes, my team has them. Why? I smiled, though there was no warmth behind it. My gaze shifted to Blake. Because he just expelled me from this meeting, which means per our security protocols I've initiated infrastructure lockdown. The entire cloud network is now in secured status. No access, no migration, no deal closure, until I manually restore clearance. The silence that followed could have suffocated someone. Blake's face cycled through several shades. What are you talking about? You can't just... Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Security Framework, I said calmly. Any lead architect removed from a project for cause must immediately secure their infrastructure to prevent unauthorized access or modification. It's automatic. The moment you revoked my credentials and dismissed me from the team, the lockdown triggered. Kyle Brennan, Stratosphere's chief security officer, actually laughed. She's right. I remember that clause. We specifically approved it because it prevents exactly this scenario. Unauthorized personnel making changes to critical infrastructure. I'm not unauthorized personnel. Blake's face was now edging toward crimson. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer. With no administrative access to the cloud environment Ms. Delacroix built, Sheffield said, pulling out her tablet. I'm showing system status as locked. Everything's in read-only mode. She looked at Blake with something between pity and disgust. You just bricked a $4.2 billion deal. This is insane. Blake turned to Monroe. Sir, I apologize for this unprofessional behavior. This is clearly sabotage. I'll have our IT team override her lockdown immediately. With what credentials? I asked. I'm the only administrator with master access keys. That was a specific requirement from Stratosphere's security team. A single point of accountability during migration setup to prevent exactly the kind of optimizations you're describing. Monroe was staring at Blake with an expression I recognized. I'd seen it before on executives' faces, the precise moment they realize someone they've been negotiating with is in over their head. It was a look of reassessment, calculation, and anger. Let me make sure I understand. Monroe's voice had dropped to something quiet, which was somehow more unsettling than shouting. You removed the lead architect from this project, The only person with access credentials to the infrastructure we're purchasing. 30 minutes before our deal closure meeting? It's not, she's exaggerating the situation, Blake stammered. We can work around this. My team can rebuild access, or we can bring in our parent company's enterprise specialists. Rebuild access to a secured cloud environment? Brennan shook his head. That would take weeks, months if she built it properly. And any forced override would compromise the entire security framework, which would violate our compliance requirements. We couldn't legally migrate our data onto a platform that's been breached. Amanda Sheffield was typing rapidly on her tablet. I'm showing that the presentation files are also locked. Whatever enhanced design you were planning to show us, Mr. Hutchinson, we can't access it. That's when Blake made his second colossal mistake. Instead of apologizing, instead of trying to de-escalate, he turned on me with pure venom. You vindictive, this is corporate sabotage. I'll have you arrested. You're holding our infrastructure hostage. Extorting the company. I'm following protocol, I said quietly. A protocol that Stratosphere Data Alliance specifically required and approved. If I'm still terminated from this project, I'll spend the next 72 hours documenting the handoff process and working with whoever you designate as the new lead architect. But that's a 72-hour minimum for proper security transfer. Industry standard. Monroe raised a hand, cutting off whatever Blake was about to say next. Mr. Hutchinson, I need to speak with your father. Now. My father is in Europe on business. Then get him on a video call. Because right now, I'm trying to decide whether Stratosphere Data Alliance has any business partnering with Obsidian Infrastructure at all. The color drained from Blake's face. Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Sheffield said. You fired the lead architect on a $4.2 billion project without verifying who had critical access. That's not a misunderstanding. That's catastrophically bad judgment. Blake looked around, desperate, as if someone might materialize to rescue him. The handful of Obsidian Infrastructure employees who'd gathered in the corridor quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Nobody wanted any association with this unfolding disaster. Alina, Monroe turned to me, his tone completely transformed. I apologize for this situation. Can you give me an honest assessment? Is this deal salvageable today? I considered the question professionally, dispassionately, the way I trained myself to assess a crisis. Technically, yes. I can restore access in about 15 minutes. The infrastructure is solid. Nothing's been damaged, just secured. We can proceed with the original presentation and timeline. I paused. But Mr. Monroe, you need to understand what Blake meant when he said his team made optimizations. Enlighten me. 3 days ago I was copied on an email thread, accidentally I think, where Blake was discussing streamlining our security protocols. Specifically, he wanted to reduce the encryption layers on data transmission to improve speed benchmarks. He also suggested eliminating redundant backup systems to cut costs. Kyle Brennan's face went pale. Please tell me he didn't implement any of that. He didn't have access to implement anything. But those were the improvements he was planning to present today. Faster speeds, lower costs, more impressive demo metrics. I met Monroe's eyes. And absolutely none of it would have met your compliance requirements. The first security audit would have failed. You would have been legally prohibited from storing client data on our platform. The silence stretched out. Amanda Sheffield finally broke it. He was going to blow up a $4.2 billion deal to make the demo look flashier. I don't think he understood that's what he was doing, I said. I think he genuinely believed security protocols were just red tape, unnecessary complexity that people like me add to justify our jobs. Monroe turned to Blake with a look of absolute contempt. Is that true? Blake's mouth opened and closed several times. The encryption layers do slow down performance. I was trying to find a balance between security and efficiency. There is no balance, Brennan exploded. We're a data consortium. We manage healthcare records, financial transactions, personal information for 200 million users. Security isn't negotiable. I understand that, I just thought. You didn't think, Monroe cut him off. That's the problem. He turned to me. Alina, if you're willing, I'd like to proceed with the original presentation. Your design, your protocols, your team. Of course, I said. And Mr. Hutchinson, Monroe's voice could have cut glass, you're going to sit in that boardroom silently and observe what professional competence looks like. Then you're going to call your father and explain why Stratosphere Data Alliance's partnership with Obsidian Infrastructure now includes a contractual requirement that you have zero involvement in any technical decisions. Blake's face had gone ashen. You can't. I can and I will. Those are the terms. Take them or we walk. Monroe checked his watch. You have 30 seconds to decide. Blake looked at me with pure hatred, but he nodded. Good, Monroe said. Alina, whenever you're ready. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure admin app. My fingers moved through the authentication sequence I'd run hundreds of times. Biometric scan, rotating passcode, secondary verification. The system status shifted from red to amber to green. Access restored, I said. Welcome to Obsidian Infrastructure, Mr. Monroe. I apologize for the delay. The boardroom meeting ran 3 hours. I walked Randall Monroe, Amanda Sheffield, and Kyle Brennan through every piece of the cloud infrastructure, the redundant security layers Blake had wanted to eliminate, the encryption protocols meeting healthcare and financial industry standards, the backup systems guaranteeing 99.99% uptime, the scalability frameworks that would let Stratosphere grow without rebuilding the architecture from scratch. Blake sat in the corner, silent, watching his authority evaporate. Slide by slide, Sheffield asked detailed technical questions. Brennan stress-tested the security scenarios. Monroe listened, occasionally weighing in with business considerations. It was exactly the meeting I prepared for, professional, thorough, collaborative. At the end, Monroe stood and extended his hand. Alina, this is exceptional work. Amanda, Kyle, any concerns? Both executives shook their heads. Sheffield actually smiled. This is the most robust enterprise cloud architecture I've reviewed in 5 years. I feel completely confident migrating our operations. Then we have a deal, Monroe said. Alina, I assume you'll be our primary point of contact during implementation. That's typically how we structure these projects, yes. Good. I'll feel much better knowing you're overseeing the technical execution. He glanced at Blake. I'd like to speak with Graham Hutchinson about personnel assignments before we finalize the contract, but the technical framework is approved. After Stratosphere's team left, Blake and I were alone in the boardroom. Late afternoon sunlight slanted across the presentation screen, still frozen on my final slide. You think you've won something here? Blake's voice was low, venomous. My father owns this company. One call from me and you're finished. Maybe, I acknowledged. But that call is going to be really interesting. You'll have to explain how you nearly destroyed a $4.2 billion deal because you couldn't tolerate someone else being more competent than you. You'll have to explain why Stratosphere now requires contractual language keeping you away from technical decisions. You'll have to explain why the client trusts me more than they trust his son. You sabotaged me. I did my job, I said quietly. I built infrastructure that works. I established security protocols that protect client data. I created safeguards to prevent unauthorized changes. That's not sabotage, Blake. That's competence. Something you might consider developing instead of coasting on your father's money. His hand twitched toward me for a second, and I genuinely thought he might do something catastrophically stupid. But he caught himself. Get out, he hissed. Gladly. I have implementation timeline documents to prepare. I gathered my things and headed toward my office on the 3rd floor. Halfway down the corridor, my phone buzzed with a security alert from the infrastructure monitoring system. I pulled it out and my stomach dropped. Unauthorized access attempt, server room 2B, multiple failed authentication attempts, physical breach detected. I broke into a run, taking the stairs 2 at a time down to the server floor. The secure door to server room 2B had been propped open with a doorstop, and I could hear voices inside Blake's, and another I recognized as Justin Kellerman, head of IT operations for Hutchinson Holdings, Graham's parent company. I yanked the door open. Blake and Kellerman were standing in front of the main server rack. Kellerman's laptop connected directly to the infrastructure backbone through an emergency maintenance port. What the hell are you doing? I demanded. Blake spun around, his face flushed with anger and something closer to desperation. Getting back what's mine. Justin's overriding your lockdown protocols. In about 2 minutes I'll have full administrative access, and you'll be the one locked out. Kellerman looked uncomfortable. Blake, this really isn't. Keep working, Blake snapped. I pulled out my phone, fingers flying across the emergency response screen. Justin, you have 15 seconds to disconnect that laptop before the system triggers a catastrophic security breach protocol. Every alarm in this building activates, all data cascades to off-site backup, and this entire server farm shuts down. She's bluffing, Blake said, though his voice wavered. Am I? I held up my phone so they could see the countdown. 11 seconds. This is a federal compliance requirement, Blake. Any unauthorized physical access to servers containing protected health information triggers mandatory breach response. That means we have to report this to Stratosphere, who has to report it to federal regulators, who will fine both companies millions of dollars. Your father will lose the deal, face regulatory penalties, and probably lose his data handling license. 8 seconds. Kellerman's hands froze over his keyboard. Blake, she's right if this registers as a breach. She's trying to scare you. She won't actually. 5 seconds. I tapped the screen. The countdown stopped at 4. Then I pressed the manual escalation button. Alarms tore through the building. Red emergency lighting flooded the server room. Kellerman yanked his laptop cable out so fast he knocked over a tool bag. Blake's face drained from red to white in an instant. You're insane, he shouted over the alarms. I was already dialing building security. This is Alina Delacroix, Senior Cloud Architect. I have an unauthorized breach in server room 2B. Send security immediately. Yes, I'll stay on the line. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. 3 guards burst through the door, hands on their equipment belts. Miss Delacroix? The lead guard asked. I pointed at Kellerman's laptop, still tethered by its dangling cable. Unauthorized system access attempt. I need this room secured, that equipment confiscated as evidence, and both of these men escorted from the building. Evidence? Blake sputtered. You can't, I work here. You authorized a physical breach of a secured server environment containing protected client data, I said coldly. That's a federal crime, Blake. I have to report this. It's not optional. The security guards exchanged a look. Blake was the CEO's son, but I had authority over the server infrastructure, and they knew it. Sir, you'll need to come with us, the lead guard said to Blake. Call my father, Blake demanded. Call him right now. We will, sir. After we secure the scene. They escorted Blake and Kellerman out. I stayed behind, running diagnostics on every system Kellerman's laptop had touched. The access attempt had been crude, a blunt force try at overriding the authentication system. He hadn't gotten far, but the attempt alone was enough to trigger every compliance protocol we had. My phone rang. Graham Hutchinson. Alina, what's happening? Security just called me about alarms and my son being detained. Blake attempted to physically breach the server room with an outside contractor, I said. They were trying to override security protocols by connecting directly to the infrastructure backbone. I have it on security footage and system logs. Silence. Then, quietly. Is the Stratosphere data compromised? No. I stopped them before they accessed anything critical. But we have to report the attempt. Federal law. I understand. Graham's voice was strained. Do what you need to do. I'll be on the next flight back. The fallout took 3 days to fully settle. Graham Hutchinson flew back from Europe and spent 5 hours in a meeting with Randall Monroe. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but the outcome was unmistakable. Blake was stripped of any role touching client relations or technical decisions. His title stayed the same, Chief Innovation Officer, but it became an empty label. He had an office, a salary, and no authority whatsoever. Meanwhile, Monroe insisted on a contract amendment granting me direct oversight of the Stratosphere implementation, with a clause stating I couldn't be removed from the project without Stratosphere's written approval. In effect, Obsidian Infrastructure could no longer fire me without jeopardizing its biggest client. To his credit, Graham Hutchinson understood the business reality of the situation. He called me into his office 4 days after the server room incident. Alina, I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. I put my son in a position he wasn't ready for, and he nearly cost us everything. That's on me. I appreciate that, Mr. Hutchinson. Randall Monroe spoke very highly of you. Said you're the only reason he's still willing to do business with us. He also suggested strongly that we restructure your role and compensation to reflect your actual value to this company. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an offer letter. VP of Cloud Architecture, a significant salary increase, an equity stake in Obsidian Infrastructure, and a guaranteed seat in technical decision-making for all major contracts. This is contingent on the successful Stratosphere implementation, Graham continued. But Monroe seems confident you'll deliver. Are you interested? I took 24 hours to think it over, not because I wasn't interested but because I needed to know this wasn't just crisis management. I needed to be sure Obsidian Infrastructure was genuinely changing and not offering temporary appeasement that would evaporate the moment Stratosphere's deal was safely closed. I scheduled calls with Amanda Sheffield and Kyle Brennan. Both confirmed their leadership specifically wanted me involved in the long-term partnership. Sheffield even mentioned Stratosphere was weighing additional cloud projects that could be worth another $2.3 billion over 5 years, contingent on their confidence in the technical team. That was leverage, real concrete leverage. I went back to Graham with a counteroffer. VP title, yes. Salary and equity, yes. But I also wanted the authority to restructure the engineering team, hire additional senior architects, and establish technical review protocols that would prevent anyone, including Blake, from making infrastructure decisions without proper vetting. Graham agreed to all of it. Blake predictably was furious. He went to his father demanding my termination, insisting I'd humiliated him, undermined his authority, and poisoned his client relationships. Graham's response, according to office gossip, was brutal. You humiliated yourself. Alina just refused to cover for your incompetence. The Stratosphere Data Alliance migration took 9 months, complex, meticulous work, exactly the kind of project that couldn't be rushed or oversimplified. We moved 847 terabytes of data, established security protocols across 14 regional data centers, integrated with Stratosphere's existing systems, and stress-tested every conceivable failure scenario. Blake had no involvement at all. He'd show up to the office, sit in on meetings he wasn't invited to speak at, and essentially serve as a walking cautionary tale about the difference between authority and competence. About 6 months into the implementation, I was working late in the Infrastructure Command Center, a secure room where we monitored system performance, when Amanda Sheffield stopped by for an on-site review. Got a minute? She asked. Of course. She settled into a chair, watching the monitoring displays track real-time data flow. I wanted to thank you, not just for the technical work, which has been flawless, but for what happened in that corridor. I'm not sure I understand. Blake Hutchinson tried to steamroll you, tried to use his position to override your expertise, and you didn't back down. You didn't get emotional or defensive. You just calmly demonstrated why you were right and he was wrong. Sheffield smiled. That matters, especially for women in tech leadership. The number of times I've watched talented women get bulldozed by mediocre men with confidence. She trailed off. You showed a different path. Stand on competence, document everything, build systems that protect good work. I just did what made sense professionally, I said. That's exactly my point. You treated it as a professional problem with professional solutions, not a personality conflict or ego battle. Blake made it personal. You kept it professional. That's why you won. The Stratosphere implementation launched successfully, right on schedule. 0 security breaches. 99.97% uptime in the first 3 months. Client satisfaction scores that beat every benchmark. Randall Monroe sent a company-wide email to Obsidian Infrastructure praising the technical team and specifically calling out my leadership. Graham Hutchinson forwarded it to me with a 3-word message. Thank you, Graham. Blake sent nothing. But 2 weeks after the successful launch, he stopped coming into the office. Officially, he was pursuing other opportunities. Unofficially, Graham had finally accepted that his son lacked the temperament and skills for a leadership role in a technical company. Blake was moved into a position at one of Graham's real estate holding companies, somewhere his instincts for shortcuts and showmanship would be considerably less catastrophic. I didn't celebrate his departure. Honestly, I felt a little sorry for him. Blake had been set up to fail by a father who handed him authority without ever requiring him to build competence to match it. That's a recipe for exactly the kind of disaster that unfolded in that corridor. But I didn't dwell on it either. There was too much real work waiting. The success of the Stratosphere implementation opened new doors. Other enterprise clients saw what we built and wanted similar infrastructure of their own. Within a year, my team grew from 8 engineers to 32. We took on projects for healthcare systems, financial institutions, and government agencies, each one complex, demanding, and genuinely satisfying. I made a point of mentoring junior engineers the same way I'd once been mentored, teaching them not just technical skills but how to navigate corporate politics without sacrificing their integrity, how to document decisions to protect good work, how to hold firm on professional standards while staying collaborative. Several of them eventually asked about the Blake incident, which had become something of a legend inside the company. I always gave the same answer: build systems so good that removing you creates immediate obvious problems. That's not job security through gatekeeping. That's job security through excellence. 3 years after that corridor confrontation, Obsidian Infrastructure was acquired by a major tech conglomerate for $8.7 billion. The Stratosphere contract and the enterprise cloud business it spawned were cited as the deal's primary assets. Graham Hutchinson made a fortune. So did everyone holding equity, myself included. At the acquisition celebration, Graham pulled me aside. "You know what's funny," he said. "If Blake had just let you run that meeting, none of this would have happened. Not the Stratosphere expansion, not the additional contracts, not the acquisition. He tried to take credit for your work, and instead he created the exact circumstances that let everyone see how valuable you actually were." That's one way to look at it. It's the only way to look at it. You saved this company. Then you built it into something worth billions. He raised his glass. "Thank you, Alina." I don't know what happened to Blake after the acquisition. Last I heard, he was working in luxury real estate development in Miami, which honestly seemed like a better fit for his skills and temperament. Some people are meant to build things. Others are meant to sell them. Blake had finally found his proper role. As for me, I took my equity payout and started my own cloud security consulting firm. Small, specialized, focused on helping companies build infrastructure that prioritizes security and reliability over flashy demos. Several of the engineers I'd mentored at Obsidian Infrastructure joined me. We work with clients who understand that the cheapest solution is rarely the best one, who value expertise over titles, who recognize that the person actually doing the technical work might know more than the executive with the impressive job description. It's slower growth than a venture-funded startup. We'll never be a unicorn valued in the billions. But every system we build works. Every client we take on gets infrastructure they can trust. And nobody on my team will ever be shut out of a boardroom because someone's insecure son decided they were a threat. The morning Blake tried to have me thrown out of that meeting, I'd walked into work expecting an ordinary day. A big presentation, sure, but routine in its structure. I had no idea I was about to face a career-defining moment. The kind where every decision matters and the consequences ripple out for years. Standing in that corridor, watching Blake's smug expression as he revoked my credentials, I had a choice. I could have handled it in the strictly compliant sense, walked away quietly, filed complaints, trusted the system to eventually right the wrong. A lot of people would have made that choice. It's safer, less confrontational. But I'd built safeguards into my work specifically to prevent unauthorized changes. I'd established protocols to protect the integrity of the infrastructure. Using them wasn't sabotage or insubordination. It was following the exact procedures Stratosphere Data Alliance had approved, because they understood the risks of letting unqualified people make technical decisions. Blake thought he was asserting authority. What he actually did was create the perfect test case proving why those safeguards existed in the first place. The most satisfying part wasn't watching him fail. It was watching Randall Monroe, Amanda Sheffield, and Kyle Brennan recognize competence the moment they saw it. They didn't care about office politics or corporate hierarchy. They cared whether the infrastructure would work, whether their data would be secure, whether the person leading the project actually knew what they were doing. When Blake tried to override my expertise with his authority, he unintentionally created the clearest possible demonstration of why expertise wins out. That's the real lesson in all of this. Not that karma exists or that bullies always get what's coming to them, though in this case Blake certainly did. The real lesson is that genuinely good work builds its own protection. When you construct systems that hold up, document your decisions, maintain professional standards, and develop real expertise, you become difficult to replace, not because you're gatekeeping or hoarding knowledge, but because replacing you would mean rebuilding everything you created from scratch. Blake never understood that. He believed power came from titles and family connections. He learned painfully that real power comes from being so good at what you do that removing you creates immediate expensive problems. I still think about that moment sometimes. Standing in the corridor, watching the error message flash across the security reader, feeling that spike of anger and humiliation, tempted to just walk away and let Blake crash and burn without warning. But I didn't do it for him. I did it for Randall Monroe, who'd spent 6 weeks reviewing my work in good faith. For Amanda Sheffield and Kyle Brennan, who'd collaborated professionally on every technical requirement. For the engineers on my team who'd worked late nights getting everything right. For the principle that competence should matter more than connections. Blake was just the obstacle. The real story was everyone else recognizing what genuine professional excellence looks like. If you've made it this far, thank you for spending time on this story. If workplace justice and professional integrity matter to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. We're working toward 6,000 subscribers, building a community that believes competence and character should define careers, not politics and privilege. Whether you subscribe or not, thanks for being here. The tech industry loves to talk about disruption and innovation. Those things matter, but so does reliability. Security matters. Expertise matters. The unglamorous work of building systems that hold up under stress matters more than most people realize, right up until something breaks. Blake wanted innovation without infrastructure, speed without security, authority without expertise. That's not innovation. That's recklessness. The boardroom he tried to shut me out of became the place where everyone saw the difference. And sometimes that's all the payback you need.